The world's financial leaders have gathered in Washington, D.C. this week for the World Bank and IMF spring meetings. It comes as confidence in the global economy is being weakened by the trade war with the U.S. And it is a particularly tense moment for the IMF and the World Bank, with the U.S. considering withdrawing from both institutions, raising questions about the future of global economic leadership. Analysts say the U.S. economy started strong this year, but the IMF has lowered its global growth forecast, blaming the fallout from President Trump's trade war. At the same time, Mr. Trump's pressure on the Federal Reserve is fueling market jitters and shaking confidence in the central bank's independence, which is seen as vital to the health of the U.S. economy. U.S. stocks and the dollar have suffered further falls after President Trump renewed his criticism of the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Mr. Trump called Jerome Powell a major loser.
The landscape has changed since our last World Economic Outlook update in January. We're entering a new era as the global economic system that has operated for the last 80 years is being reset. Since late January, many tariff announcements have been made, culminating on April 2nd with near universal levies from the United States and counter-responses from some trading partners. The U.S. effective tariff rate has surged past levels reached more than 100 years ago, while tariff rates on the U.S. have also increased. For the United States, the tariffs represent a supply shock that reduces productivity and output permanently and increases price pressures temporarily. This adds to an already weakening outlook and leads us to revise growth down by 0.9 percentage point to 1.8%, with a 0.4 percentage point downgrade from the tariffs only, while inflation is revised upwards. For trading partners, tariffs act mostly as a negative external demand shock.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from New York by Jennifer Saw, who's a markets reporter for Business Insider. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us. I know you've got to run in a minute, so let's gallop straight into it. The IMF has released its latest World Economic Outlook. It's the first significant global gauge of the effect of President Trump's widespread trade tariffs, and it is not by any measure good, is it?
No, no, to say the least, it's definitely not. And, you saw that in the selling pressure in U.S. stocks yesterday. The Dow was down, by nearly 1,000 points at the end of the trading session. And, that in large part, it's from, concern and uncertainty revolving around tariffs. But, in large part, that's also about what you said earlier, too, President Trump. His criticism of Jerome Powell, calling the Fed chair a major loser, and, suggesting that the U.S. economy, is bound to enter a slowdown, for instance, if the Fed doesn't cut interest rates immediately. It's certainly very unprecedented for a president to do that. And, markets, I think, are rightly concerned about the independence of the Fed. Investors really have to ask themselves now, is Trump actually going to try to replace Powell, before the end of his term, which ends in 2026? And, the implications that could have, in terms of, the market and whether, people can really trust, is the Fed going to remain non-political in its decisions? So investors are kind of in a place right now where they're grappling with a lot of uncertainty regarding trade policy, and they also have to ask themselves, is the U.S. really the best place to be in terms of, investing, and, is that the place that they want to keep their money? So that kind of explains, a lot of the pressure that markets are under right now.
Well, that's a very interesting point because, of course, the price of gold is hitting a new high, from what I understand, while the dollar and U.S. stocks, as you hinted earlier, have suffered further sort of falls. And that is because of continuing unease in the markets over U.S. economic policy.
Yes, that's right. It's kind of interesting, like these assets, like gold, you mentioned, the U.S. dollar, U.S. treasuries even, which have, traditionally been seen as safe assets or safe haven assets, I'm sorry. Places where investors, go, to hedge against inflation, to hide out during periods of volatility. People are no longer, the reputation of them as a safe haven asset, is kind of starting to deteriorate. It's not completely, thrown out the window. People aren't, completely abandoning the US, I would say. But there is some kind of doubt and uncertainty lingering there, and that is in, like you were saying, in large part, due to tariffs, and again, due to the uncertainty of, what exactly is what exactly is Trump going to do in regards to, how he's treating the Fed chair, how, and of course, a lot of is also up in the air. How are these negotiations, regarding some of the tariffs, especially tariffs, on China, are going to go. And how is the Fed going to react in response, in terms of, future economic data if the economy starts to weaken. Yeah, so there's definitely a lot in the air right now, and investors are having, a little bit of a second thought when it comes to, placing their investment or their assets in the U.S.
And to make investors further sort of demoralized, I understand that inflation in the US, which had been making progress, has started to stall out. And those nettlesome tariffs are not helping, are they?
Yes, that's also another thing that's kind of fueling market concern. It's kind of interesting. So, like the narrative that Trump is trying to, kind of put out there when he calls Fed Chair Powell a major loser, for instance, and says, the Fed doesn't cut rates immediately, the U.S. is bound to enter a slowdown. It's kind of like a show to say, these tariffs are not causing, the inflation surge that economists have long said that tariffs, are about to cause on the economy. And I think that, that also explains a lot of the selling pressure in US assets. And markets are kind of looking through this narrative that Trump is trying to put out that, it's not the tariffs, the Fed needs to cut rates. But it's kind of widely known among investors, I would say that they can already see the impact that tariffs are having on the U.S. economy, in terms of lifting inflation expectations for the future, lifting growth expectations for the future. The Fed itself has lifted its inflation and its growth outlooks for the U.S. for 2025 and 2026. So there's kind of like a cognitive dissonance there. Trump is saying one thing, and the markets are kind of seeing through that, and they already see the negative impact that tariffs are having on the U.S. economy. Yeah, so that's also, like you mentioned, another thing that's also adding to a lot of the pressure in U.S. assets and kind of the doubt that investors have, in terms of, is the U.S. really the safest place to be right now?
Indeed. And of course, that is also spilling over into the World Bank and the IMF, two organizations that are built on sort of multilateral economic cooperation. I mean, it's instructive that they're meeting in Washington at the moment, as Mr. Trump's tariffs are in the process of dismantling sort of global trade partnerships. So presumably tariffs for them as well are top of the agenda at those meetings.
Yeah, I think that tariffs are top of the agenda, all over the world. So many trading partners with the U.S., and of course, the U.S. is a major trading partner to many countries. So it's definitely the story to watch now in financial markets, no matter where you are. And for instance, a lot of the stability of the global financial system, it's also tied to the U.S. financial stability as well. So, if something were to happen, for instance, if markets are rocked in the U.S., as we saw on Monday, or as we saw, a few weeks ago when Trump rolled out his tariffs and it caused, a major sell-off in stocks, the world feels it as well. So it's definitely not something that's isolated in a microcosm. Yeah, and that's why the intention around the world is so centered around the U.S. and what is the U.S. going to do in regards to its trade policy, around the world at this point. And I have to say a lot of the outlook for the future is kind of up in the air. Again, a lot of it is going to depend on these tariffs on the negotiating block. How are those going to go? What kind of progress are we going to make? Stocks in the U.S. are up today. The Dow is up over 1,000 points right now, and that's largely due to good news on the tariffs negotiation front. So Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, is saying to Trump that he believes that the trade war with China is unsustainable, that there could be good news on the horizon, and as a result of that. There's definitely some green shoots that are kind of in progress right now. But of course, markets are kind of in a wait and see mode. Nothing has been negotiated yet. No trade deal has been, officially announced yet. So we're kind of like stuck in this limbo, and it's going to be, according to a lot of forecasters on Wall Street, it's going to be a rocky time until these tariffs kind of shake out and markets see what's actually going to happen, to the US's trade policy with these important nations, especially with China.
Very interesting indeed, if a little bit worrying. Thank you very much indeed, Jennifer. Jennifer Saw is a markets reporter for Business Insider. She was talking to me on the line there from New York.